need, and we do not need to shy away from this in this tenure, because our farmers really need an answer from this place. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. And I call on the Minister, and Minister, you have 15 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I would like to thank members for bringing this important motion to the floor of the House today. Since coming into post at the start of this year, I have had numerous opportunities to hear first-hand the difficulties faced by farm businesses suffering from TB within their herds. Difficulties not only from a financial perspective, but also from a well-being perspective too. I've heard too often the toll TB breakdowns continue to have on the mental health of our farmers. As members have noted, cattle farming is an extremely important part of the Northern Ireland economy, and I value it. The value of trade in our bovine products is approaching £3 billion each year, with our processing sector employing around 8,000 people. Our bovine TV programme is essential in underpinning this trade, as it provides necessary assurance to our domestic and international markets that our cattle and cattle products are safe. Indeed, our programme is approved by the European Commission and forms the basis of our access to trade cattle and cattle products throughout the single market. However, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I share members' concerns regarding the disappointingly high levels of TB across Northern Ireland, with herd incidence here having remained above 10% since 2022. I am also acutely conscious of the more recent increase in animal incidence, which now stands at over 1%. This has risen from 0.55% at the end of 2014. This points towards large breakdowns, more cattle being slaughtered for disease control. Indeed, over 20,000 cattle have been removed from farms in Northern Ireland in the past 12 months. This has a direct environmental impact and has placed those farm businesses suffering from the loss of their cattle in a most challenging position. The slaughter of cattle for the control of TB results in the direct loss of farm income, especially for dairy farms, and has a detrimental impact on genetics from the loss of key breeding stock. I recognise this, and I am fully aware of the need to take action. These high disease rates are also placing significant pressure on my department's budget. Last year, the cost of delivering our TB programme was over £55 million, with the compensation bill accounting for over £36 million. My officials advised that this year's costs could be in the region of £60 million. This also curtails my ability to allocate more of my scarce resources towards tackling TB. Indeed, it is likely the case for additional TB measures may cost more in the short term, both from a resource perspective and through finding more disease on farm before we will begin to see more medium-term reduction in both disease and expenditure. I acknowledge that more needs to be done, which is why, after taking up a role as Chief Veterinary Officer earlier this year, I asked Brian Dewar to undertake a thorough review of our approach to tackling bovine TB, including the Department's 2022 TB eradication strategy recommendations. The CVO is engaged widely as part of this process, with farmers and their representatives, veterinarians, epidemiologists, environmental representatives and agricultural processors. He's also spoken with colleagues in neighbouring jurisdictions, and I'd like to thank everyone who's given their time to share their thoughts and knowledge with Brian and his colleagues. The CVO's review is nearing completion, and I will brief the members of the Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs Committee on its content and approach next week. Within the motion today, members have noted the important role played by members of the TB Eradication Partnership over its tenure from 2018 to the end of 2023. I would agree and would highlight that the group provided valuable advice to the Department and to my predecessor, and was an important conduit through which the Department could engage on the detail of specific TB policy matters with stakeholders. I've also had the opportunity to meet with a number of former members of TBEP during my time as Minister, and would again like to take this opportunity to thank all TBEP members for their work during that time. I'd also like to record my appreciation to the members of the TB Strategic Partnership Group, which preceded TBEP. This is a Department of Acronyms, folks. The TB Strategic Partnership Group spent 2 years engaging with vets, scientists and farmers to develop a thorough and holistic package of measures designed to address all the factors which contribute to the spread and endurance of this difficult disease. Learning from best practice elsewhere, including places as far away as New Zealand and Australia, the TB Strategic Partnership Group drew upon the best scientific advice available, including behavioural science, to support the Department with a set of recommendations which, following 2 further public consultations, form the basis of our current bovine TB eradication strategy. As some members will be aware, the tenure of TBEP members drew to a close in 2023. My department commissioned an independent strategic review of TBEP under the auspices of the Strategic Investment Board. The SIB report reiterated the importance of working in partnership with stakeholders and the need for both myself and my department to have access to independent scientific advice when formulating TB policy. I therefore look forward to considering the CVO review of our current approach and taking into account the SIB review of TBEP to ensure that, as we move forward, correct stakeholder structures are put in place to have the best chance of success. As I'm quite sure that members are aware, addressing the endurance of bovine TB in Northern Ireland will not be easy nor straightforward, and there are many challenges that we must collectively address if we are to finally set Northern Ireland on a path to eradication. I've already mentioned the unacceptably high level of disease currently circulating here and the challenge of funding additional disease control measures and a constrained public finance environment. We must also recognise that efforts to control bovine TB, both here and in other parts of the UK and Ireland, date back to the 1950s, and yet the disease persists. It is clear from the behavioural science supported by experiences elsewhere in the world that bovine TB eradication efforts cannot succeed without proactive engagement of all stakeholders. There must be shared ownership of any plan to eradicate bovine TB, with meaningful collective responsibility and a recognition of the skills and knowledge that each stakeholder brings to the table. This is crucial in changing the culture surrounding bovine TB here. I am acutely aware that there are strongly held and often opposing views among stakeholders on how best to proceed, but I believe all stakeholders can and need to work together. In terms of biosecurity, further scientific evidence also points to the predominant spread of TB between cattle themselves. There are elements of our farming practices which are clearly unsuited to disease control, such as fragmentation of our farm holdings and the extremely high number of cattle movements which occur throughout Northern Ireland each year. The high TB incidence affecting our dairy herds may also reflect the intensification of that sector. Members will also be aware of the limitations of the tuberculin skin test. Whilst effective for herd level surveillance, its lower sensitivity does result in individual cattle with TB going undetected, and many within the room will know what I'm talking about. Again, the scientific evidence points to the need for increased use of supplementary interferon gamma blood test, such as extra testing comes with additional cost, not least the pain of slaughtering more cattle, certainly in the shorter term. Given the high disease rates across Northern Ireland at present, I would encourage all farmers to review thoroughly their measures for keeping TB out of their herds and to minimise spread if their herd is suffering from a TB breakdown. There are excellent sources of advice available, including on my own departmental website. Turning to wildlife. Members in industry have frequently raised with me the role played by wildlife in the maintenance and spread of TB here, and indeed the proposed amendment to today's motion reflects this, which my party will be supporting. As members will appreciate, there are strong views generated on both sides of this very emotive debate. In parallel with the CVO review, my officials are working to address the issues raised in the October 2023 Judicial Review decision, which overturned the previous Minister's proposal for a non-selective cull of badgers. When this work concludes, I will be considering the finalised advice carefully before, Mr Deputy Speaker, advising members on any preferred way forward in the new year. In closing, Mr Deputy Speaker, and also in summing up, it is clear to me since becoming Minister that addressing the issue of bovine tuberculosis is one of the most difficult challenges facing our cattle farming sector and my department today. The key priority is to work with the CVO and his colleagues to put in place a deliverable and affordable set of measures which will seek to halt the current upward disease trend and the financial pressure this creates both for farm families and my limited departmental resources. Difficult decisions will need to be taken. Mr Deputy Speaker, I wholeheartedly agree with the sentiment of the House today that these decisions must and will be based on the best scientific evidence available. I am committed to working with members, along with farmers, vets and all our stakeholders on the challenges ahead. With member support, I will ensure that, within the resources I have at my disposal, and once I receive the finalised CVO review, my department puts the current spread of TB into reverse, and in partnership with the industry and wider stakeholders, we finally set Northern Ireland on the path to eradication of this devastating disease. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I call on Deborah Erskine, and you have 5 minutes to wind on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I welcome this debate today. At the outset, can I declare an interest just in relation to a family farm that my husband's family have? In this chamber before, I've made mention of the very real challenges TB places on farms in Northern Ireland. 1 in 10 farms have experienced the difficulties associated with TB breakdown in the past year, and it has a toll mentally and physically, which has been discussed in this chamber today. And we do have the highest rates of bovine TB in Europe, according to the UFU. And the bottom line is the status quo and to do the same but expect different results is no longer viable. Continuous testing and removing animals and compensation has far from dealt with the TB issue. Instead, it wrecks the family farm and surrounding farms, and when you look at the cost to the public purse, this isn't just an issue for farms, it is an issue for all taxpayers, and Ms McIlvaine made mention of that in relation to her speech. And in my constituency of Fermanagh and South Tyrone, which has very high rates of TB, I have seen the very real consequences of farmers at breaking point and unable to cope with the situation. Farmers care, and they care about their animals, and they can't bear the effects of this anymore. So I just want to briefly point to what some members had said in the course of the debate today. Declan McAleer, he had talked about wildlife intervention in his speech and the fact that it must be humane, and I think that's something that has come up in the chamber and members have agreed in relation to that. I want to apologise to Ms McIlvaine and Mr Blair that I wasn't here for some of the debate and what you said in relation to it, but I do understand that, and I welcome the support from the Alliance Party in relation to our amendment today. And I know that from Ms McIlvaine, this is an area that she is deeply interested in and knows an awful lot about this. And I welcome her passion in relation to this, because she really does want to make sure that this issue is dealt with for farmers in Northern Ireland. Diane Armstrong, my constituency colleague, I haven't had an opportunity to formally welcome her to the chamber, and I welcome Diana to the chamber and look forward to working with her in relation to Fermanagh and South Tyrone issues, because this is an area that really affects our constituency. Patsy McGlone, he touched on the impact and the loss of herd upon farm families and what that means. And he mentioned as well about deer, which I think is really, really important, and that's something that I have seen in my own constituency in relation to wild deer, which is quite prevalent, and I think it was important that he did point that out, so I thank him for that. And Nicola Brogan, yes?
Wild deer, would the member think it's wise to consider the possibility of reintroducing the wolf to Ireland's landscape to control deer populations? The deer obviously wiped out after the Cromwellian conquest of Ireland. Would there be merits in considering reintroducing the wolf to Ireland's landscape?
I'll give you an extra minute for that. Definitely not for that wolf intervention. 1 extra minute. Over
yeah, we'll just see when the hunting ban does come to the floor of the House why members sit in relation to that. But anyway, I just want to go to Nicola Brogan in relation to her comments, and she pointed to biosecurity and also the importance of support to farmers, which I think is vitally important. And to thank William Irwin for his contribution as well, and pointing out the compensation levels and any reduction in relation to that, and the impact again that will have on our farming families. And Sean Mulholland as well again pointed out the stress and the impact that there is in relation to bovine TB, and that's why we need to have measures in place. We need to ensure that we have effective measures in place to help in relation to that. Lastly, I just want to point to Robbie Butler and congratulate him on his elevation to chair of the DERA committee. Let's hope we get this issue sorted out in relation to that. And I welcome what the Minister's comments in relation to the impact and the cost and what it means for the economy as well, because it does impact as well our agri-food sector, and I think we do have to take cognizance of that fact as well. And Timothy Gaston, I want to point to as well in terms of what he said in terms of the infection levels within badgers in terms of the post-mortem and the incidence rates. And how the evidence points to some of that as well, which I think was a vital contribution in pointing that out. So there will be very difficult decisions in relation to this, and particularly when it is an emotive topic when you're looking at wildlife intervention. But we can't do nothing, and we have to move on this, and it's vital that we move on it very, very quickly, because time is ticking in relation to our family farms and what it means for them. So thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And despite the wolf intervention, I call on Anya Murphy, please. Thank you.
Last Cancunian, I'd like to thank everybody for contributing to this motion this afternoon. I must admit it went a lot more smoothly than I initially thought, but it's great that we have got joint consensus across the floor, which I suppose demonstrates the nature of bovine tuberculosis, a disease that continues to weigh heavily on our agricultural sector and on the lives of countless farmers across the north. This Assembly recognises the severity of the threat posed by BTB, not only to animal health but also to the stability and resilience of our farming communities. As we have heard throughout this debate, infected herds lead to lost livestock, lost income and mounting frustrations as farmers watch their hard work and often years of dedication building up productive herds with excellent genetics threatened by a disease that we have yet to control effectively. In other countries that has been mentioned, targeted wildlife intervention has proven successful in controlling BTB. The Republic, England, New Zealand and Australia all have successfully driven their infection rates down. The examples laid out by my colleague earlier demonstrate that controlling wildlife reservoirs is crucial to breaking the cycle of infection and ensuring long-term bovine TB controls in livestock. BTB is a cross-border issue affecting North and South, and this underscores the necessity for a united approach to combat the disease across the entire island. Bovine TB data for the North is organised by the 10 divisional veterinary office boundaries, not the 12 DERA direct regional offices. The data includes unique herd breakdowns defined as herds with at least one BTB reactor in a given year, regardless of past infections. These key stats for bovine TB for the North from 2021 to June 2024 show notable variations in herd breakdowns across the regions. I know locally in Enniskillen, I think we had the second highest incident rate, and Uri actually sat as number one. Last Cancolier, our farmers and farm families are the backbone of rural life and play an essential role in providing food security and sustaining our economy. Yet year after year, they have to bear the brunt of this persistent disease at huge emotional and financial cost.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for everybody for contributing to this debate. The question is that the amendment standing in the name of Michelle McElveen, Tom Buchanan and William Irvine be made. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Any contraries? The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Therefore, the question is that the motion as amended be agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contraries? The ayes have it. The ayes have it. And if we move, since we're all here ready for the next debate, if we move swiftly on. The next item of business is a motion on protecting farming families following the Autumn Budget 2024. Clerk, could you please read the motion, please?
That this Assembly condemns the failure by the UK Government to prioritise farming families and the rural economy as part of the Autumn Budget 2024. notes with deep concern the decisions to introduce new thresholds for inheritance tax and agricultural property relief, which will jeopardise succession planning on farms, create barriers for new entrants to agriculture, and discourage investment in many farm businesses. Further notes that these policies undermine the aim of increasing food security and promoting more sustainable and efficient farming practices. Is equally alarmed that the Chancellor of the Exchequer has opted not to ring-fence farm support budgets nor uplift levels of funding in line with inflation, calls on the Minister of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs to bring forward proposals to mitigate the impact of these damaging policies on local farms, as well as avoid significant increases in food prices, and further calls on the Minister to work with the Minister of Finance to deliver an early and concrete commitment to farming families that current levels of financial support will not only be maintained but increased in the next financial year.
I call on Michelle McIlvaine to move the motion.
Moved.
Thank you. Thank you. The Business Committee has agreed to allow up to 1 hour 30 minutes for this debate. The proposer of the motion will have up to 10 minutes to propose and up to 10 minutes to wind. All other speakers will have 5 minutes. Michelle, please open the debate on the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The autumn budget was a disaster for farming families and the rural community. The 6,000 people who attended the Econ Centre last night will attest to that. It was a budget dreamt up by a socialist government with no consideration for rural communities. While the new thresholds for inheritance tax and agricultural property relief have taken the headlines, there are negative implications as a result of other announcements made by the Chancellor. Cumulatively, these announcements, taking into account the already precarious situation being faced by local farmers due to policy inaction, will have a devastating impact on the viability of farming going forward. This in turn will impact on farm prices in the UK, which will be borne by the working person's pay packet, and our food security when local food producers begin dropping out of the market. These announcements are in the context of there being about 26,000 active farm businesses in Northern Ireland, which employ around 51,000 people. Inheritance tax is payable at a rate of 40% of the value of the deceased's estate. However, there are certain reliefs and thresholds which can reduce that liability. Agricultural land attracts 2 types of relief: agricultural property relief, APR, and business property relief, BPR. APR applies to the agricultural value of the land, while BPR applies to any value above agricultural value. Currently, in most cases, APR could be applied at 100% to agricultural land which was being inherited, meaning that it had a value of 0 for inheritance tax purposes, while BPR was applied where the land had a development value, and if the owner had an operating farm business, this could also be applied at a rate of 100%. These reliefs meant that farms could pass from generation to generation without attracting inheritance tax liability. This means that families could avoid having to sell agricultural land to pay a large tax bill. What the Chancellor has announced is that full APR and BPR combined would be limited to £1 million, and that relief would reduce to 50% for anything over that. As a result, farmers with assets over £1 million would face inheritance tax of 20%. Now, there's been a lot of misguided comments being made on social media regarding the change in inheritance tax relief on agricultural land. And these are from people who clearly know nothing about farming or agriculture in general. They see figures like £1 million, £3 million or more and think that yes, that should be subject to inheritance tax. But what they don't take into account, however, is that while the farms may be worth millions, these are not liquid assets. The value is not realisable until it's sold, and once sold, it ceases to be a functioning farm or ends up in some corporate farm. For a family facing a huge tax bill, they simply do not have the money sitting in a bank. Farming is a dangerous profession. Farming accounted for 47% of all workplace fatalities in 23-24. Yet the government is telling farmers to transfer land 7 years before their deaths as a way around this change. An animal crush or an incident with machinery could cost a family farm more than just a family member. As someone pointed out last night, the hearse would be no sooner leaving the lane when the taxman would be knocking on the door. As the Minister has already stated to this chamber, a third of farms in Northern Ireland would be affected by this change. The impact is even more stark for the dairy sector, where 77% of dairy farms could be impacted. A farm need only be 27 hectares to reach the threshold. In fact, as agricultural land prices are higher in Northern Ireland than other parts of the UK, this change in relief will hit us disproportionately harder. How are farmers meant to pay for this other than by selling their assets when 60% to 80% of farm incomes over the last 10 years has come from subsidies? Recently, we debated the weakening of the basic farm payment, and this announcement will heap further pressure on the future of family farms. And it will inevitably accelerate the breaking up of farms, resulting in driving more young people away from farming when we need to be encouraging them to stay. This will affect our food security going forward. Now, as we outlined in that debate, farm incomes have reduced by 46%. A £1 million cap sounds high to the layman, but there are few viable farms worth under £1 million, and even those would be high earning. A viable farm is not necessarily a wealthy farm. Farms in Northern Ireland are asset rich, but often cash poor. Meanwhile, farmers, like other employers, have seen their national insurance contributions rise from 13.8% to 15%, along with a threshold at which they have to pay dropping from £9,100 to £5,000. This means employers will pay more for each employee. Farm businesses in Northern Ireland pay and employ around 51,000 people. So tax on farmers will increase while incomes have fallen dramatically. Worse, this will directly impact on the security of thousands of farm jobs and the pay and conditions for employees. This goes hand in hand with the increase in the national living wage, which will rise by 16.7%, from £11.44 per hour to £12.21 for those 21 and over. And for those aged 18 to 20, there will be a rise from £8.60 to £10 per hour. This is an inflation-busting rise in these salaries. No one is against people being paid a decent wage, and I am highlighting this as an additional financial pressure being placed on farmers in a budget that already heaps pressures on them. Bear in mind what else is being faced by local farmers: the ammonia regulations choking development, being blamed for what we see in Lough Neagh, proposals to stop MV and sheep imports, bovine TB not being addressed, the real term reductions in the basic payment scheme over the last 10 years, the huge inflationary and wage costs accruing over recent years, the devastating impact of the winter storms on last year's potato crops, and the implications of what is contained in the Climate Change Act and the investment which is needed to address those. Is it any wonder that our farmers are now responding to calls for action? We welcome the launch of the UFU's campaign to oppose the impacts of the budget on family farms and the agri-sector as a whole. I attended last night's rally and was delighted to see a unity of purpose across the political spectrum and the industry. Slipped in almost as an afterthought, though, was the announcement that agriculture and fisheries funding was to be no longer ring-fenced. Instead, this will form part of the block grant. This now means that our agri-food sector must compete with health and social care and education for funding. It's always been our position that direct agriculture support should be available outside the Barnett formula. Ring-fencing was a recognition that food security is a national strategic asset, but this, as a principle, seems to have been abandoned by the Labour government. The review of agricultural funding, led by Lord View following the UK's exit from the EU, recommended the need to provide this ring-fencing for farm support, but no similar exercise was commissioned prior to the decision to remove it, and that seems rushed and foolhardy. As I indicated earlier, farms in Northern Ireland have relied on somewhere between 60 to 80% of their income being subsidised, but by removing ring-fencing, that has now been jeopardised. This now places an onus on the Dairy Minister to press for an early and firm commitment from the Minister of Finance that future farm budgets will be ring-fenced for the forthcoming financial year, and then ring-fenced and increased, at least in line with inflation in future financial years. Northern Ireland produces enough food to feed 10 million people across the UK. The government should be stimulating growth and investment in the farm sector, but instead, with this suite of announcements, it will drive people away. Just last year, someone said, and I quote, "Losing a farm is like losing any other business. It cannot come back." It's why the lack of urgency from the government, the lack of attention to detail, and the lack of long-term planning is not on. You deserve better than that. You deserve a government that listens, that heeds early warnings, that shows the level of ambition needed to tackle the challenges you face. That someone was the now Prime Minister to the National Farmers Union. He is the new existential threat to farming that he warned about earlier in that speech. If he was leading a listening government, he would address these problems instead of compounding them. Agriculture is worth £6 billion to Northern Ireland, and it's our largest manufacturing sector. The consequences of these announcements will be rising food prices, food production threatened as a result of the changes to APR, job losses, and poor terms and conditions for those who are employed. Mr. Speaker, the Minister heard farmers last night. He heard their desperation, and they need him to demonstrate his support to them, not by carefully scripted words, but by his actions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I call on the Chair of the Dara Committee, Robbie Butler.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise to support this motion and express my deep concern about the UK Government's failure to adequately prioritise farming families and the rural economy in their most recent autumn budget of 2024. The decisions to introduce new thresholds for inheritance tax and agricultural property relief represent not just a financial burden, but a significant blow to the agricultural community, which forms the backbone of Northern Ireland's economy, culture and society. And if anyone wanted to see what that looks like, as the member has eloquently already stated last night, the Icon Centre in Lagan Valley, there are over 6,000 farmers and family there to justify the very import of this motion today. So I thank the members from the Democratic Unionist Party for this timely motion. The introduction of new thresholds for inheritance tax and agricultural property relief risks jeopardising the viability of many family farms, and probably more so in Northern Ireland than any other part of the United Kingdom. Succession planning is already a challenge for farming families due to the high cost of farmland, the relentless and moving government policies and the uncertainties in the agricultural sector. And these changes will force families to make impossible choices, selling off parts of their land or assets to meet tax obligations, undermining the ability to pass on farms to the next generation. And thankfully, our farmers are getting some airtime on our media to share their frustrations. And we cannot ignore the additional barriers this creates for new entrants to agriculture, if there are any, Mr Deputy Speaker. Young people are already facing challenges like access to affordable land and resources will be further deterred from pursuing careers in farming. This risks hollowing out the future of agriculture, as our ageing farming population will struggle to find successors willing or able to take on the financial and operational challenges of the sector. This, I suppose, seems to be the single most resounding call from the event last night in the Icon in Lagan Valley, where we listened to a couple of young farmers at the very start of the debate outline the pressures that they are now facing about the viability of their very futures, not just for them, but for their children and their children's children. The changes also discourage investment in farm businesses at a time when we should be encouraging farmers to modernise their operations, embrace sustainable practices and improve efficiency. These draconian tax policies make it less appealing to invest in the future. And we know that if we don't invest, farms cannot adopt innovations in renewable energy, precision agriculture and sustainable land management, all of which are critical to addressing the climate crisis and ensuring food security, which I'm not even sure that this Labour government actually agree that we do have a real tangible threat to our food security. Food security is a national priority and we cannot afford to undermine it through short-sighted policies. I often tell this story, I'm going to tell it one more time. I'll probably tell it more actually, but when I was a butcher I do remember the introduction of Brazilian beef for the first time. We'd been used to selling Northern Irish and Irish beef and UK beef for years, and it's a quality produce, you cannot compare the two. This Brazilian beef comes in and blows the price of what the farmers can produce it for, and it's nowhere near as good. And in fact, there's 3 months date on the blinking stuff when it's in your fridge. How does it stay good for 3 months? I'd love to know what's pumped into it. Anyway, then get off my hobby horse about Brazilian beef. These policies risk diminishing our agricultural output and increasing our reliance on imports, and that's what we need to avoid. The rising cost of food is already a concern for many families, and further pressure on local food production will only exacerbate this issue. Equally troubling is the Chancellor's decision to remove the ring-fenced farm support budgets and failure to adjust them in line with inflation over a number of years. Without these inflationary uplifts, the real value of farm support is eroding on an annual basis. For many small and medium-sized farms, this funding is not a luxury, it's essential to their survival. Farmers are grappling with rising input costs from feed to fertilisers, and they need certainty about the financial support available to them. Yet this budget offers none. This lack of commitment undermines not only the livelihoods of farmers, but also the stability of the wider rural economy, which relies on the success of agriculture. And the motion rightly calls on the Minister for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs to bring forward proposals to mitigate the impacts. I urge the Minister, even there's a few here, create a succession planning grant scheme possibly, establish a Young Farmers Investment Fund, and maybe, and I know this is more difficult, but targeted tax relief or farm incentives need to be revisited. And I know that the Minister for Agriculture will need to work closely with the Minister for Finance, perhaps to secure commitments for maintaining and increasing farm support budgets. Multi-year budgets, I suppose, are the gold standard where this could possibly be achieved, and we all need to be facing in that direction. Mr Deputy Speaker, I see you looking at your button there. Come on, give me a second to listen. I just thank the members for bringing this debate. It's a really important one, and we need to just reverberate those champion calls for farmers and the sector at this critical time. Thank you, Mr Deputy
Thank
Speaker.
you. I call on the Vice Chair, Declan McAleer.
Thank you. I too welcome the opportunity to speak on this motion, which addresses a matter of critical importance for our farm families, rural communities and the wider agricultural sector. And the Assembly and indeed our party, we condemn the British Government's recent autumn budget for neglecting the pressing needs of our rural economy and failing to support the very families who put food on our tables and keep our countryside thriving. And certainly the timing of this afternoon's debate is very timely, following the meeting in the Icon Centre last night, and Robbie Butler reminds us countlessly there, it's in the Lagan Valley area. But it was an absolutely phenomenal meeting last night, and we did hear some very harrowing personal stories from farmers who are going to be impacted by these changes. And I want to take the opportunity to commend the UFU for organising that event, and indeed there in Westminster today, meeting the Secretary of State and other leading political figures where they're bringing the fight over there, and also the RUAS for making the premises available as well. And the decisions in this budget reveal a deep disconnect with the realities that farmers face. The new thresholds that are proposed for inheritance tax strike at the heart of family farming. These measures jeopardise succession planning, make it harder for families to pass down their farms to the next generation. Farming is more than a business, it's a way of life, it's a tradition that's rooted in our communities for generations. And these tax burdens may force families to sell land to pay this unfair family farm tax, which will actually eat away at the fabric of our rural life. In addition to threatening succession, these policies stifle investment in farming businesses. Why would you invest in a farm if you could just pass on a huge tax burden to your children, the next generation? And modern agriculture demands continuous innovation, investment in technology, sustainable practices and greater efficiencies. Farmers are already working to meet the challenges of climate change, food security and environmental responsibility. But instead of supporting these efforts, the British Government has created an economic climate that makes progress harder to achieve. Farmers need certainty that their investments will secure not just their future, but that of their children and their grandchildren. The consequences of these decisions go far beyond the individual farms. If families are forced to sell land or scale back operations, domestic food production will decline. In a world where global supply chains are increasingly unpredictable, undermining local food production is not just short-sighted, it's irresponsible. I think Patsy Malone touched on that in his contribution to the meeting last night. And food security depends on resilient, productive farms. Of course, this is on top of the challenges created by Brexit, which stripped farmers of the stability provided by the EU Common Agricultural Policy. Yet the British Government has failed to replace this support with adequate measures. Farmers now face rising costs and administrative burdens without the uncertainty of stable funding. Equally alarming is the Government's refusal to ring-fence farm support budgets. Without this security, farmers cannot plan or invest in sustainable practices needed to address climate challenges. Rising costs for fuel, feed and labour are pushing many to the brink. Expecting farmers to do more with less while bearing greater personal financial strain is deeply unfair and unsustainable. If farm businesses falter, the economic fallout will ripple right across the north and beyond. Agriculture is the backbone of rural economy and supports thousands of jobs and industries. Undermining it will drive up food prices, hit hard-working families and the most vulnerable in our society. We need policies that protect family succession, encourage young people to enter farming and ensure that sustainable modern agriculture practices can thrive. Food security must be a priority, built on the foundation of a strong, stable support for our farm community. Our farmers are the custodians of the countryside, the producers of our food and the stewards of a way of life that enriches us all. This Assembly must give them the assurance that they are valued, their contributions are understood and their future is secure. Let us send a clear message. We stand firmly with our farmers against policies that threaten their livelihoods. This Assembly will support them today, tomorrow and for generations to come.
Call on John Blair.
Deputy Speaker, the Alliance Party welcomes this motion and we thank the proposer and her colleagues for bringing it forward. I also want to express today our condemnation of the UK Government's failure, total failure, to protect farming families and our rural communities in the recent autumn budget. The decisions made in that budget regarding our agricultural sector are alarming. The limitation of £1 million of agricultural property relief now brings farmers in Northern Ireland within the scope of inheritance tax, and this has been made clear over and over again. This poses a direct threat to our farming families, a threat which is disproportionate in scale when compared to the rest of the United Kingdom. The financial burden and emotional stress placed on individual farmers are significant, especially as they contend also with price volatility, fluctuating incomes and unprecedented weather conditions, amongst other issues. On a broader scale, we cannot overlook the impact this will ultimately have on our overall economy, as well as on food security. Despite the Chancellor's assurance that 3/4 of claims will be unaffected by these changes, DAERA's data suggests that 1/3 of farms here and as many as 3/4 of dairy farms could be impacted. Deputy Speaker, it's important to remember that this is a reserved matter. Nonetheless, the DAERA Minister has been actively working to resolve this issue within the capacity available to him. He has engaged with the Northern Ireland Secretary as well as DEFRA to voice his concerns and urge the UK Government to urgently rethink the proposed changes. The Minister has also worked with the Finance Minister to send a letter to the Chancellor outlining the disproportionate impact that these changes will have on family farms in Northern Ireland, and I'm delighted this was co-signed by the First Minister and Deputy First Minister. While we grapple with these recent announcements and the Minister works to reverse the changes, it is important to look at what could be done locally to minimise the potential impacts. The Minister has recently launched the Farming for the Generations pilot scheme to support farm succession planning. This scheme will assist 60 farm families in creating a succession plan, conducting a farm business review and developing a personal growth plan for the successor. Succession planning is crucial in preserving family farms in Northern Ireland, where many farms have been passed down through generations. These farms are maintained by families that have consistently invested in their land. Unfortunately, young farmers increasingly struggle to pursue their dreams of taking over the family farm. By creating barriers, Deputy Speaker, for new entrants into agriculture, we are hindering innovation and limiting growth within the sector. If we want to sustain our vibrant agri-food industry, we must continue supporting and encouraging young people to consider careers in agriculture. Equally concerning is Westminster's choice not to ring-fence farm support budgets or to adjust funding levels in line with inflation. This signals a troubling disregard for the challenges facing our agricultural community. Minister Muir has been making the case to executive colleagues that the funding for agriculture, agri-environment, fisheries and rural development should be earmarked locally within the Executive's 25 to 26 budget and beyond. The Alliance Party will continue to support the Minister's efforts as this funding is crucial in addressing climate change, protecting our natural environment and supporting our economically and socially significant agri-food sector. Our farmers deserve a commitment to stability and sustainable growth not uncertainty and decline. And it's been pointed out that they gathered in their thousands last night to remind us of this. We must therefore send a clear message of reassurance from this chamber to our farmers, acknowledging their value and commitment to our society. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, John. I call on Patsy McClellan.
Thank you. And I'd also thank the proposers of the motion here today and the opportunity to highlight the failure of the British Government to prioritise farming families and the rural economy in the autumn budget. The introduction of new thresholds for inheritance tax and the change, obviously, to agricultural property relief will have a significant impact on farmers here. We heard that last night. Any of us who were there, we heard it loud and clear. But we also heard the emotion of the attachment of generations to the farmland and what this could potentially do in future times. The instability that it created, the raw emotion that there was in the room last night, and the fear for the future of many people who have had that land handed down through the generations to them. It was palpable last night. The Minister has stated that it is likely that around a third of all Northern Irish farmers will be brought within the scope of inheritance tax as a result of these changes. In the dairy sector, that number could be as high as 75%. We have some of the highest value agricultural land in these islands, which will amplify the impact of that. I know the Minister has challenged the UK Government on these changes, but unless that challenge is successful, there's a genuine risk to succession planning on farms. I want to make this point. I made this point last night. Governments are entitled to do what they do, but this government has to look at the bigger picture, the food security issue at a time whenever there's world instability. And with world instability, and God forbid it goes a stage further to even greater chaos on the world stage, with that world instability, one of the first things that's affected is food. And at a time whenever we have some of the best quality food produce here that is feeding 10 million people, why do anything that's going to undermine that, that's going to jeopardise that, that's going to leave that insecure at a time whenever there's enough insecurity on the world stage? That's a major issue, major political issue for the UK Government whenever they're considering this factor. Yeah, sure.
Would the member not agree that during COVID, farmers stepped up and made sure that our families were fed here in Northern Ireland, and they were a key and critical part of that fight against COVID? And it's about time the UK Government recognised the role that they play and how critical it is.
Absolutely.
And the member has an extra minute.
I take entirely your point. And I would think that some of those new Labour MPs who have been elected to rural constituencies will be getting this message. And back to that original point, this is certainly not the time to be doing this. At a time of uncertainty, to create further uncertainty in the rural economy and food production is not the time for the UK Government to be doing that. And they need to seriously reflect on that issue. On another point, Minister, I do welcome the timely launch of the Farming for the Generations pilot scheme, which is targeting up to 60 farm families. The scheme has the potential to support farm families through planning for succession and help ensure the long-term sustainability of farms. According to the DAERA statistics, the average age of farmers in the north is 59. 36% of managers of farm family in the north are over the age of 65, and only 8% are under the age of 40. Succession planning will clearly play an important role in sustaining those family farms, and that's crucial to what we've been hearing today. There have been a number of debates recently where the subject of financial support for farming has been discussed, and we've heard it here as well today. If our amendment had been selected, we would once again have highlighted how the actions of successive British governments, firstly capping the level of agricultural support in 2020 and now removing the ring fencing of that support, are a direct result of the DUP campaign Brexit. That's a reality. Indeed, as a result of Brexit, funding for agriculture has suffered real-term cuts. The annual funding for agriculture allocated by the UK Government has been capped at approximately $330 million since 2020. Around $300 million of that is in direct payments to farmers. To maintain the real value of this funding, The overall funding should have increased to $389 million by the end of 2024. That's a cut of around $60 million this year alone. From next year, the funding for agriculture will be included in the block grant. Funding that had been ring-fenced and guaranteed will now be part of the annual negotiations between the parties and the Executive. Funding to support farmers will now be competing with health, with infrastructure, with education. This will almost inevitably lead to cuts in the support farmers and farming families will receive. But while the UK Government may have removed the ring-fencing of direct payments for farmers, there is nothing to prevent the Executive from putting that ring-fencing back in place, as the Minister indeed has previously told the Assembly. And I quote, "It is within the power of the Executive to earmark funding for agriculture, agri-environment, rural development and fisheries locally." Unquote. The Executive itself also has the power to uplift the level of that funding in line with inflation on an annual basis. They could guarantee that funding over a number of years and restore the certainty that farmers need. That is the message that I hope the proposers of this debate today and all those speaking take to their party colleagues in the Executive. Thank you.
Thank you, Patsy. I call on Onion Murphy, please.
I welcome the opportunity to speak on the motion brought by the members opposite today, which draws urgent attention to a crisis that is growing with each passing day. Our farmers are facing pressures that not only threaten their livelihoods, but their well-being and mental health. As we discuss the implications of the British Government's autumn budget, or rather the lack of priority it places on farming families and the rural economy, let us remember that these are not just numbers on a balance sheet. This is about people who are carrying out immense burden with little support. Farmers are the backbone of the North, and many of us joined with farmers last night at the UFU rally, as has been stated around the House, opposing inheritance tax, and heard powerful testimony and concerns from farmers who are worried about the futures of their children and grandchildren. They ensure our food security, contribute to our economy, steward our natural environment, yet they are under relentless pressure, which is hard to quantify. Amidst all of these challenges the farm families currently face, the British Government has decided not to ring-fence farm support in this budget, nor has it raised funding to account for inflation. Our farmers are expected to meet increasing costs for feed, fuel and equipment without knowing if they will have the support they need. Without a secure ring-fence budget, there is no assurance that our farmers will have stability to invest in their futures, their farms or even their families at this minute in time. This lack of commitment sends a message that farming and farm families are not a priority. These pressures take a toll on mental health. Farmers work day and night with no certainty that their hard work will even break even, facing long hours, isolation, financial instability and an unpredictable future. We are already seeing the impact of this stress in our rural communities play out, with rising levels of mental health concerns. We cannot stand by as our farmers bear these pressures alone. The mental health crisis in rural areas is very real, and if we do not act, it will only worsen. Agriculture is an all-island industry, deeply interconnected across borders through shared markets, supply chains and environmental challenges. The success of farms in the north impacts the entire agricultural ecosystem on this island, from trade in livestock and produce in collaboration on stability and animal health. However, the absence of a ring-fence agriculture budget in the north undermines this vital sector, placing our farmers at a significant disadvantage compared to those in the south, where substantial secured funding supports rural development and innovation. Without stable and predictable investment, farmers in the north face uncertainty, limiting their ability to plan, innovate and compete effectively. This threatens not only local livelihoods, but also the resilience of the all-island agri-food sector, weakening our shared capacity to address food security, climate change and rural sustainability. Farmers need a long-term ring-fence budget commitment to support agriculture in the north. Our farmers deserve financial packages in these uncertain times, ring-fenced financial packages in these uncertain times. Let us now honour their work, support their well-being and protect the future of farming in the north.
Thank you very much, Donia. Colin William Irvine.
Thank
Mr Deputy Speaker, and again can I declare an interest being a partner in a farm business. This is a welcome opportunity for this House to send a united and resolute message to the Labour Government that this tax rate on farmers cannot be tolerated. I encourage all farmers, indeed anyone with an interest in protecting our ability to produce food and be custodians of the environment, to also record their opposition to this callous and mad decision by the Treasury. I do not recall a more direct threat to the future of farming than this decision, and it is one that I have taken considerable number of representations from farmers who are absolutely irate about this Labour tax rate. They see it, and I see it, a direct attack on farming. It would be hard to imagine a worse or more backward policy than what has been announced by the Treasury. It is vital that this decision is reversed. We witnessed last night 6,000 people gathered at a protest meeting at the Econ Centre. The message was very clear that farmers are not going to simply roll over and accept this draconian and damaging attack on farming in Northern Ireland. There are further protests today on the mainland, which will also serve to focus the minds of the decision makers. As our motion clearly points out, the outworkings of the new thresholds for inheritance tax and agricultural property relief will without doubt negatively impact succession planning on farms. It has been an age-old practice that farmers will generationally hand over the reins to younger family members who are not really interested in farming, sustaining the family farm into the future. Should Labour proceed with this change, then the natural succession will be dealt a massive blow to the levying of a huge tax bill on that young person. The Labour government is effectively ruining agriculture, and it is a shocking situation to have to envisage. It is so counterproductive, it is hard to imagine more negative and industry damaging policy than what is looming before us. Farmers are strong on food security and committed to producing high quality food for our population. Why risk this security of supply? What I'm hearing very clearly out on the ground is the requirement to send a very clear message to the Labour government that changes must be reversed, and that the message that I stand solidly behind in terms of encouraging new entrants to farming. Can you think of a greater discouragement to a young man wanting to continue to build on the hard work of his father than a £500,000 tax bill? What a catastrophic and ill thought out policy by the Treasury. There must be an urgent refocusing, a new priority placed on farming by Labour to ensure that the UK, which Northern Ireland is an integral part, not left high and dry in terms of its ability to produce food. We must not become a nation of consumers relying on other countries for our food. That would be a very foolish and negative development, yet that is the potential outcome of this bad Treasury policy. Also, as our motion illustrates, there is deep discontent with the decision of the Chancellor not to ring-fence farm support budgets or to increase funding in line with inflation. This again speaks of the lack of understanding by Labour of farming, and I fully encourage the DRO and Finance Ministers to ensure the levels of financial support will be maintained and increased in the next financial years. There is much work to do in this regard, and it is time to meet these challenges head on for the good of the agri-food industry. Thank you.
Thank you, William. I call on Andrew McMurray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I, like others here, attended the Icon Centre yesterday evening, and I was glad that I did. I was able to hear it firsthand, the concerns of Ulster's farmers. So I thank the UFU for organising it, and I thank the DUP for bringing this forward. They were able to bring forward, or they were able to give context as to how this issue affects them. So if I could give context to my own connection, my granddad always told my mother that if I'd been called John, I would have inherited a farm somewhere between Claggan and Lochvey. So while far enough out not to be a pecuniary interest, I want to declare an interest of sorts. I share the concerns over the impact of the new inheritance tax rules and the changes to farm support budgets will have on farming families in Northern Ireland. Farmers are the custodians of our countryside, and family farming is the cornerstone of our agricultural sector. The new tax rules are bad for farmers everywhere in the UK, but farmers in Northern Ireland will be particularly badly affected due to the comparatively high value of agricultural land. The Chancellor says that only 1 out of 4 farms will be affected by the new rules, but their estimates that the percentage in Northern Ireland will be higher than that, 1 in 3 being a more realistic estimate across different types of farms, and for dairy farms, the number could be even higher as 3 out of 4. I'm sure many other MLAs here will be, have come across it as well, but none of the farmers I've spoken to recognise the £17,000 average price per acre, more like £20,000 to £25,000. So these new tax rules are going to put a strain into the point of breaking our rural economies. Farmers also play a key role as we transform into a greener and more environmentally friendly society. Farmers take great pride in their role as custodians of the countryside. Older farmers put in place nature-based measures that they will not see the benefit of, but will come to maturity for their children. Many now are worried that they will not be able to pass this on to see it mature. To farm in a sustainable way, first of all, you have to be farming. That's a quote from some of the people I've been speaking to. Farmers are not the sole reason for the environmental breakdown we are seeing, but they're an integral part of this solution. As one farmer put it in my constituency, the best way to help farmers to be nature-friendly is for them to be profitable. If farmers are profitable, farmers will feel comfortable and invest in green measures. Precarity is the enemy of innovation and investment. It is frustrating to see the UK government has decided to create barriers for young farmers, rather than supporting them to carry their family farm forward in a sustainable way. Ending ring-fence funding for agriculture is only going to worsen the impact on our farmers. Farm assets are also built up over generations and require big investments. Farms, land, buildings and machinery are passed on through generations. For this inheritance tax to be implemented, it is simply punishing hard work that's gone before. Yes, these assets are valuable, but only because they allow them to run a profitable farm. This ability is lost if assets have to be sold off to fund the tax bill. Inheritance tax will hinder investment and development within the industry. I know the Minister Muir agrees with me that this is a bad budget for farmers, and the Minister has written alongside executive colleagues outlining the concerns and urging the Chancellor to reconsider these changes. The Minister is making the case to executive colleagues for ring-fencing agricultural funding locally to ensure we can continue to tackle the major environmental challenges we are facing together while protecting rural economies and food security in Northern Ireland. I welcome all of these efforts. Some of the impact of the new tax rules can be mitigated by succession planning, and I want to highlight the Minister's efforts to help farming families through DAERA's Farming for the Generations pilot scheme. I would also echo the sentiments expressed from the UFU present yesterday evening in encouraging all those who are potentially affected to seek professional, tax and legal advice on this matter. But yet the despondency and anger over this matter is and was palpable. In conclusion, I would say, as was said to me last night, we can disagree on any number of things, many on points of principle, but this inheritance tax is wrong and should not be implemented. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Andrew. I call Nicola Brogan, please.
I welcome the opportunity to speak on this motion this afternoon as we defend the future of farming families and the rural communities that sustain us all. The British Government's autumn budget does not prioritise our farmers and protect the rural economy in the north of Ireland. These are not oversights, they are political choices that threaten the very foundation of rural life and the agricultural backbone of our society. It must be said, though, that Brexit has compounded the challenges facing our rural communities. By leaving the European Union, the North lost the security and support of the Common Agricultural Policy, which had protected farmers for decades. In return, the British Government has refused now to ring-fence farm support budgets or adjust them for inflation. Farmers now face rising costs for feed, fertiliser and equipment due to Brexit-induced trade barriers and supply chain disruptions. Yet they are expected to shoulder these burdens without adequate financial stability or support. The lack of a ring-fence budget has created deep uncertainty. Farmers need secure funding to plan, invest in sustainable practices and meet the challenges of climate change and food security. Brexit stripped away the EU safety net, but the British Government has failed to provide a meaningful replacement. Adding to this pressure are changes to inheritance tax thresholds and agricultural property relief. These measures place financial barriers on family farms, making it harder for younger generations to inherit their land. Moreover, the lack of secure funding undermines critical agricultural initiatives. Climate change, animal welfare and food security demand sustained investment. Yet again, the British Government treats these issues as optional, not recognising that sustainable farming is essential to our shared future. When our farmers struggle, the impact ripples across the entire rural economy. Jobs are lost, businesses close and food prices rise for everybody. This Assembly must stand firmly behind our farmers. We must demand a ring-fenced budget, ensure the continuation of sustainable practices and protect the future of family farms. These are not just economic issues, they are about preserving a way of life and safeguarding the resilience of our rural communities. Let us send a clear message. This Assembly values our farming families, our rural economy and our food security.
Thank you, Nicola. I call on Diane Armstrong.
Speaker, and at the outset I wish to declare an interest on this and the previous motion as a farming family member. I rise to support this motion and thank the proposer for bringing this motion to the floor of the House today, a motion which follows from the Ulster Farmers Union rally last night at the Icon Centre. As has been referenced, over 6,000 farm family members attended this event. It really was a phenomenal show of strength in protest at the unfair and unjust plans by the Labour government to impose new thresholds for inheritance tax and agriculture property relief on farms. You only had to look to see how many young people attended that rally, young people whose future is being threatened by this punishing tax. And we need to do all we can to value their commitment to farming and to protect their livelihoods as well. The situation facing farm families is intolerable. Farmers already have had to navigate new environmental regulations, digital record keeping, increased regulatory inspections, TB, bird flu and EU regulations in the movement of animals, and last year the average farm income dropped by as much as 44%. This new tax on inheritance is the greatest threat to succession farming that we will ever know. The Labour government, with this ill-thought-out policy, will wipe out the next generation of food producers in this country, threaten food security and desecrate the land. Without the next generation of farmers, there will be no food. Farmers are looking into a bleak future, and we must collectively do all in our power to reverse this policy. This uncertainty is, as others have referenced, taking its toll not only on farm livelihoods but also on farmers' mental health. If the Labour government is genuine in its calculations that this policy will only affect large farming estates, then they should raise the threshold in Northern Ireland to higher than 1 million to reflect the smaller scale of farming in this province. As others have stated, farmers are asset rich and cash poor. Many farms with an average of 80 to 100 acres will easily reach the £1 million inheritance tax threshold due to land prices, machinery and buildings on farms. So to protect the average farming family in this country, we need to see this threshold raised. As others have mentioned, the mean age of farmers in Northern Ireland is 59, with 36% of managers being aged over 65. So really, this is coming down the tracks. We have a major problem with succession planning. Despite recent initiatives by DAERA, namely the Farming for the Generations pilot scheme delivered by Rural Support, which I welcome, farmers are still not able to grasp succession planning. On the one hand, farmers not facing inheritance tax in the past saw no urgency to plan for farm handover, and on the other hand, they were encouraged to expand and to borrow from banks to meet this expansion. Now, the Chancellor's budget announcement on introducing inheritance tax and agricultural property relief, it is ironic that the expansion of herds and flocks will push many small farms over the £1 million threshold when they are already struggling to meet repayments in investment and leave an impossible burden on successors. This decision by the Chancellor will decimate food production in Northern Ireland. Again, no farmers, no food. There is a route through this to a just and fair policy. The Chancellor must raise the threshold and ring-fence farm funding. The Minister for Agriculture needs to work with the Finance Minister to introduce increased, inflation-proofed, multi-annual support for the agricultural sector. This will be critical to Northern Ireland's economy, and without it, food production will be at serious risk. I therefore support the call for the Minister of Agriculture, along with his executive colleagues, to urgently press the UK Government for the reversal of this policy and the introduction of a budget that ensures long-term, ring-fenced and increased financial support for our farmers and the wider agricultural sector. Thank you again to the proposer for this motion, which I do support.
Thank you, Diana. I call on Timothy Gaston.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. This motion condemns the actions of the Government in relation to its assault upon family farms, and so it should. But I watch with interest how members are going to vote here shortly. As my party leader noted last night, just half of Northern Ireland's MPs bothered to vote when this issue came before the Commons, where the real power lies. Sinn Féin put their Republican ideology before farming and left farmers and their constituencies voiceless. Half of the SDLP didn't show, and the half which did supported the budget. The Agriculture Minister's party colleague wasn't there to vote either, and I will remind the Minister that one of the biggest cheers last night at the Maze came when Jim Allister called out your ammonia policy, a policy which is in place even though the Minister himself had to admit that agriculture is responsible for barely half of the pollution in Lough Neagh. I will give way to the Minister.
So, if the member was anyway aware of the issues in relation to ammonia, what I inherited was a situation which has recently been found by the Office of Environmental Protection that the Department has previously acted unlawfully in relation to that, and I'm working through these issues. And if we've got a genuine desire to try to turn around this situation in relation to the UK's decision with regards to inheritance tax, we need to work together on it. We need to have unity of purpose around this. And if we want to divide around this, then we're not going to be able to pursue a clear cause to be able to overturn this decision. And I wish we could all come together in this chamber and together in society in unity around what's been proposed by the UK Government.
The member has an extra minute.
Thank you very much. As unity of purpose in the room last night certainly wasn't in favour of your ammonia strategy. Today has already presented an opportunity which would have allowed the Minister to show that he has got the message from last night and has started listening to farmers. That opportunity came in the TB debate when he could have responded by announcing a badger call, but only more dither and delay was on offer. Maybe that's why, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Minister literally fled the rally last night. An ERA Minister who has to run out of a rally defending agriculture is an ERA Minister who needs to reflect on whether he is in the right job. Mr Deputy Speaker, the sound reasons why farm exemption for inheritance tax was introduced in the first place has not changed. Indeed, they are now more acute. Namely, farms are asset-rich but cash-poor. Inheritance tax inevitably means the breaking up of a family farm holding to pay whopping death duties demanded by government. Inheritance tax, at the best of times, is a tax of government greed. But when it prioritises the Chancellor's greed over farm survival, then it plumbs to new depths, made all the worse by the government's dishonest pretence that it will hit very few. Not so. It will cripple many family farms, not just because the threshold is so low, but because the pretence that there could be up to 3 million protection is only in rare cases. In order to address the problem, many will have no option but to sell parts of the farm. That diminishes the viability of the farm. The major problem in selling ground is that a large percentage of money raised may also be liable for capital gains because of the ongoing inflation costs of land. If the government cares anything for farming, and I fear it doesn't, then it must find reverse gear and do so quickly. That said, there are many who will vote for this motion in a few moments' time who need to look a lot closer to home than Westminster to find the cause of the problems in our largest industry. It ill becomes this House to pretend that it is exercised about farming when many of the challenges faced by the industry are and were created in this very building.
Thank you. Minister, over to you, up to 15 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I will address the two aspects of the motion in front of us. One's in relation to the earmark funding, and the other aspect is in relation to inheritance tax. And perhaps I'll start with the issue of inheritance tax, because it's the issue of last night and of today and of recent weeks. As members will know, the issues raised in this motion are a cause of significant concern and uncertainty, not only for our farming community, but also for me as Minister of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs. I spoke at the UFA rally last night, and the size of turnout and the passion expressed shows how deep this concern is. The worry about this is significant. Whilst I appreciate that decisions on taxation are a matter for the UK Government and are not devolved to the Assembly and also to our Executive, I was disappointed by the lack of engagement with devolved governments in advance of the budget announcements, given the far-reaching impact of the changes on other policy areas that are devolved. The changes announced regarding the limitation of agricultural property relief and business property relief at a rate of 100% to a combined value of £1 million came as a shock and has rightly caused real concern and anger within the local farming community. Whilst £1 million, as has been said earlier, may sound like a significant value, it doesn't amount to a large area of land, especially in Northern Ireland, where prices are the highest in the UK and Ireland and are likely to average around £15,000 per acre by the time this change would come into effect in 2026. Land values bear no resemblance to the income earning potential of land, and they are never materialised where land is passed down through generations of farming families and is continuously farmed. But this value could, due to this policy change, give rise to large tax bills. Analysis undertaken by my department suggests that the proposed tax relief change will affect around 1/3 of all Northern Ireland farms in terms of the value of land owned by the farm exceeding £1 million in agricultural value. These farms account for 60% of owned land and the majority of farm production in Northern Ireland. Furthermore, a large portion of farms of significant size will be affected, including 75% in the dairy sector, and therefore looking solely at the number of farms does not measure the impact on the sector. The limitations to APR and BPR tax relief will have far-reaching and potentially disproportionate impacts here locally. I don't agree with the UK Government's determination that this tax change targets wealthy landowners rather than family farms, that it makes no distinction between the two. Land valued at £3 million owned by a farmer is treated the same as if it was owned by a non-farmer. I met the Northern Ireland Secretary of State in the days after the budget to outline the concerns that are being expressed here in the Chamber. I also expressed these concerns yesterday to DEFRA Minister of State Daniel Zeichner in a meeting with other devolved agriculture ministers, and will continue to do so in meetings with other UK Government ministers. I'm also seeking to arrange a meeting again with the Ulster Farmers Union to discuss this specific issue next week. I have encouraged the UK Government to engage further with the farming community so they can have a better understanding of the concerns being raised, and urge them to look again at the issue given the disproportionate impact on family farms in Northern Ireland. The ability to pass farms down through generations of farming families is crucial to securing the future of our agri-food sector. I'm pleased to say that a letter signed by the First Minister, Deputy First Minister, the Finance Minister and I was sent to the Chancellor of the Exchequer yesterday following work between Kiva Archibald and myself, urging that the UK Government rethink this approach. In terms of the specific issues with regards to this motion, it isn't going to be possible for my department to mitigate the impact of the inheritance tax changes in terms of refunding tax bills, and I need to be clear about that. However, I will do all I can to make the case to the UK Government for a rethink on the issue. I'm going to encourage farmers to seek advice from a professional tax advisor on how they can minimise potential tax liability via tax planning. Food prices are determined by the market and are outside my control. I do wish to see price stability, with food affordable and prices at a level which delivers an adequate return from farmers. On a positive note, my department's new Farm Support and Development Programme contains a Farming for Generations scheme, which is currently being rolled out as a pilot. The pilot scheme aims to raise awareness of the need for succession planning on farms and to support farm families through a three-phased approach: planning for succession, developing the successor, and supporting the lead generation within the farm family. I will also link farmers without a family successor to new entrants to provide access to land and other resources. Evaluation of the pilot scheme will be input into a future Farming for the Generations scheme. And hopefully that addresses the particular issue in relation to the debate around the inheritance tax matter. And I'll be very, very clear that I stand foursquare in support of farmers in their opposition to these proposed changes in relation to inheritance tax. And there is a saying around that divided we stand, united we stand, divided we fall. We're not going to be divided. Other people may want to do that. We shouldn't be doing that in here. We need to stand united in this. We need to be clear in our approach to the UK Government on this, that we are very much united in supporting our farming community and in opposition of the proposed changes in relation to inheritance tax, because that's the only way we're going to be able to chart a better way forward in relation to this, and it's absolutely key that we do that. In terms of the earmark funding and the changes to what the term is interchanged, whether it's earmarked or ring-fenced, in terms of that change with regards to budgets, this represents a break from the past, where the money was previously received under the Common Agricultural Policy and the Common Fisheries Policy, and then it was also, following our departure from the EU, earmarked by the previous UK government post-Brexit, and it was earmarked until the end of March of next year. Although the existing funding for agriculture, agri-environment, fisheries and rural development continues, as I've said, to be earmarked by Treasury until the 31st of March next year, it is important to provide certainty on this funding after that, in light of the change announced by the Chancellor on the 30th of October. And somewhat the announcement around inheritance tax has slightly overshadowed this, and I think it's important we consider this. Whilst it's positive that funding levels have been maintained at £332.5 million, it is disappointing that they are not being increased in line with inflation. I recognise the significant contribution of agri-food and fishing businesses make to our economy and to our rural communities, and the need to continue to provide support to ensure that our farm businesses can operate sustainably, while also playing their full part in the action needed to protect and enhance our environment, improve animal health and reduce greenhouse gas emission reductions. I have therefore formally asked the Finance Minister that the resource del that has been baselined in the block grant is treated as executive earmarked. Other people would use the term ring-fenced funding for agriculture, agri-environment, fisheries and rural development purposes, and uplifted in line with inflation as part of the Executive's 2025-2026 budget exercise. I consider this important to support vital work to improve our environment, water and air quality, and to safeguard food security. The budget announcement has created considerable uncertainty in terms of funding for agriculture, agri-environment, fisheries and rural development. However, there is an opportunity to address this in the budget for the next financial year to deliver for farmers, for the fishing sector and also for our environment. I shall be continuing my engagement with the Minister of Finance and Executive colleagues as part of the ongoing Budget 2025-26 exercise to seek that this funding is earmarked by the Executive following the end of the earmarking for 3 years by Treasury, and previously in receipt of that funding from the EU as part of our participation in the Common Agricultural Policy and also the Fishing Policy. Hopefully this addresses the issues in the motion. I have the concerns around the funding. You can see that we've been working with the Finance Minister to address those. Some of these issues are arising from Brexit. We got this funding through Brussels on 7-year tranches, and now that is going. I'm working through the solutions and the issues around that, and I'll not be found wanting on that, but we need to work together on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I call on Jonathan Buckley to wind, and you've got 10 minutes, Jonathan.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Today's debate has been an important debate. Who would have thought that 4 months of Labour government would have wreaked such havoc and destruction on the stable block of UK society? Pickpocketing pensioners, tying the arm of small businesses behind their back with national insurance contribution rises, and destroying the bedrock of our communities right across this United Kingdom, our family farms. I've deliberately stood in this chamber beside a man who has been involved in agriculture his entire life. William Irwin, my friend and colleague, had to take on the burden and the responsibility of running a family farm at 20 years of age when his father passed away. Under today's rules and today's changes that we've debated today in relation to inheritance tax, William Irwin would not have been able to take on his family farm. The family farm would have been broken up, destroyed. But yet, because of the policies that we had in this country to support agricultural family farms, William Irwin was not only able to inherit his family farm, but bring it to new heights and new levels that it is today. But what is threatened, and if members listened last night to the farmers that were represented at the Econ Centre, it's about their children. I will in a moment. It's about their children. The inability and the pressures that farming life brings with high asset value and low income means that for many of them the changes will bring about the destruction of the farming unit. Because we all know today's 20% tax, inheritance tax, salami slice of the farm because it can't be paid for with farm income. The son inherits, and an important point which was raised with me last night, the old must die, but the young can die. How many young family farmers will take on the family farm not knowing what the future will bring? My colleague, Ms McElveen, mentioned the heartache that comes with family farm deaths. Members, I lost 2 uncles in family farm deaths. You can't plan for the future, but yet families faced with huge tax bills, destroying the farm viability, destroying the fabric of rural communities. It doesn't matter whether you're a Republican in Strabane or whether you're a Unionist in North Antrim, this affects us all. And the Labour government need to face up to the reality, because their approach is continuing to strip away the very fabric of this society. I look at inheritance tax as a jealousy tax, a tax of envy. It's a tax raid, because it's already income that has been taxed. Members, the changes with inheritance tax, which goes to the very heart of the anger that farmers are feeling today. Talk about succession planning. Talk about barriers for new entry, discouraging investment, rising operational costs. A farmer is facing a fight on so many fronts. And today, they are shouting, and they're shouting to government, don't put your boot on us, put your hand down and lift us up. And that's the type of language that members need to get real with, because we're undermining food security. We have some of the most fantastic producers of quality farm food in Northern Ireland. They exist right across these islands. We're known for it. But yet, in zealot quests, whether it be from Treasury or those that want to pursue net zero in cruel and ambitious ways, they're destroying the very fabric of our society, the farmers that have done so much. Members, we have to be realistic about the changes that will come as a result of the abolishment of agricultural property relief. To many of the onlookers to today's debate, they think £1 million sounds like a lot of money. These farmers are rich. Why should they not pay inheritance tax in the same way as the rest of us? It's a fundamental misunderstanding of how a family farm hands from one generation to the next. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of the huge costs involved. It's already been mentioned. The land prices in Northern Ireland vast outstrip many other parts of the United Kingdom. It's not long before you tot up £1 million, taking into account farm dwelling, farm buildings, farm machinery. I would go as far to say that yes, the estimates are that this could affect a third, 1 in 3 farms in Northern Ireland, 75% of our dairy farms. I would go as far to say that this will be much more consequential. Because as time rolls on, we will see our family farms and those families of generations ebb away and ebb away into a distant past where agriculture is looked upon as an industry of the past. When members go into the Senate chamber and they look up on the wall of this very building, there's 3 industries: shipbuilding, linen, and agriculture. The 3 pillar industries of society. The industries and the people that through blood, sweat and tears made this country what it was. Shipbuilding gone. Linen gone. Agriculture is what remains, members. And we are receiving a lesson from the farmer today. Ignore us at your peril. Members, last night was a significant gathering of those that were concerned about this budget. Some 6,000 people. They weren't just old. They weren't just men. There were men, women and children that make up our society. Worried. I had a question. Johnny, what just will tonight achieve? And it's a good question, because all of us in this room know that this is not a devolved decision. But as I listened on and the gentleman was worried about his farming viability, I said, if it's achieved one thing, it has achieved this. There's a recalibration. There's parties in here that are finding reverse gear. Because too long I've come to this chamber and I have listened to ministers and to members bring forward policies that are anti-agriculture. That's the fact. Let's not hide from it. The former Green Party member Claire Bailey brought forward a climate change bill in this place that the evidence said would result in 80% of livestock having to go. The processing sector would have to be wiped out. Thousands of jobs and farms sacrificed on the altar of net zero by the agricultural illiterate who didn't care about the devastation that it would cause on farm families. No. They voted for it in this chamber, with the exception of the TUV and DUP at its first stage reading. Members, TB. We talked about the debate on TB in this place. 90,000 cattle in Northern Ireland in the last 5 years have been destroyed, taken to the slaughterhouse. Years of family breeding, because this assembly could not deal with the wildlife problem. In closing, my message to farmers is this. You have a captive audience with your political representatives right now. Do not lose it. Hold them accountable. Today's decision, if not challenged and reversed, will lead to worse decisions in the future for agriculture. And I would say to the Minister, get real on this issue, because running out of last night's meeting with your bow tie between your legs will not help the agriculture community deal with this real threat. And I look forward to hearing the parties opposite bring forward policies that are pro-agriculture, and be assured you will be held accountable for every single one of them. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. The question on the motion standing on the order paper be agreed. All those in favour say aye. Any contraries? The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Take your ease while we hand over the top table.
Okay, members. Item 6 on the order paper, the adjournment. The question is that the Assembly do now adjourn, and in conjunction with the Business Committee, the Speaker has given leave to Colin Crawford to raise the matter of special educational needs provision in North Antrim. I call Colin Crawford, who is up to 15 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And this afternoon, I want to raise a pressing concern that affects countless families across North Antrim and indeed throughout Northern Ireland: the inadequate provision of special educational needs in our schools. Members, this matter transcends politics. It is about our commitment to ensuring that every child has access to quality education regardless of their individual challenges or circumstances. As we know, special educational needs encompasses a wide range of conditions, including learning disabilities, developmental disorders, and physical challenges, amongst others. Sadly, many children who require additional support are not receiving it, as families navigate a complex and often overwhelmed system that struggles to meet their needs. There have been numerous reports and reviews carried out by the Public Accounts Committee, NI Audit Office, the Northern Ireland Commissioner for Children and Young People, and in 2023, a NIPS's independent review. These reports and reviews highlight to us time and time again that the system is not just failing children with special educational needs, but also their families, teachers, support staff, and the schools themselves. The numerous reports and reviews have emphasised that early identification and intervention are crucial when addressing the challenges associated with special educational needs. It is clear the earlier that we intervene, the better the outcomes. However, we as MLAs know all too well that this is not the reality within our constituencies. I have had parents, and I'm sure you have also, come to me at breaking point as they are far beyond the statutory 26-week time frame for receiving a statement for their child. Parents tell me that they feel overwhelmed, unsupported, and let down by the Education Authority as they try and navigate a stressful and exhausting process to secure a school place that meets the needs of their child. Members, we want our young people and children to attend the most appropriate school for them, with support to help them overcome their individual barriers to learning. Unfortunately, because of a shortage of educational psychologists and a paperwork bottleneck in the EA, some children are waiting well beyond this. A child waiting to be statemented may be without a school place at the beginning of a new term, or they are potentially being left in a school that is not appropriate for their needs. Considering the backlog of statements, we need to look into other methods of ensuring early intervention for children at every level of our education system. The vital role of health visitors, speech and language therapists, and the entire early years sector has to be explored so children can get the support they require before school age. The type of support that children and young people with special educational needs receive may vary widely, as their needs can be very different. Some send children attend special schools, whereas some attend specialist provision within mainstream schools. Over 70% of children in Northern Ireland with special educational needs are educated within mainstream education, and to meet this demand, 112 new specialist provisions and mainstream classes were established in 105 schools across the country for the 2024-25 academic year. The creation of specialist provision affords children with more complex educational needs the opportunity to be educated alongside their peers and siblings and support the integration and inclusion of all children, creating educational environments that reflect the wider communities in which children live, while supporting parental choice of sector and location as far as possible. There are many schools, Mr. Deputy Speaker, reporting positive learning and experiences for children, teachers and parents. Need, however, continues to outstrip the availability of places within schools. Therefore, the continuation of opening new SPIMS units must proceed at pace. I would like to take this opportunity to show my appreciation to everyone in North Antrim that are working tirelessly to deliver meaningful change to children with special educational needs. A special mention must go to Castle Tower in my own hometown of Ballymena, providing education to those aged 3 to 19-year-olds with severe, moderate and physical learning difficulties, as well as the host of schools that have SPIMS units, which provide an important opportunity to move towards a more inclusive education model for all pupils. Members, there is a need to recruit and retain highly skilled and trained teachers and support staff. These staff are the backbone of any SEN setting, but they experience huge workload pressures supporting learners with special educational needs, often resulting in stress, anxiety and burnout. I often hear from teachers that they are under significant pressures attempting to meet the needs of individual children, while children are presenting year on year with more complex needs. Teachers often feel that inclusive education is something they are told to do, often without support and resources. Therefore, it is of utmost importance that teachers have the knowledge and skills to create inclusive classrooms, as well as for school leadership to provide an inclusive and innovative environment for teachers to flourish in. The role of teaching assistants and support staff cannot be understated. They bridge the gap between students with special needs and the mainstream classroom, ensuring that these students do not lag behind due to their unique challenges. We welcome the progress of the end-to-end review of SEN, which is being taken forward by the Department of Education and EA. This will allow us to take an in-depth and objective look at the SEN system and make the changes necessary for more effective service delivery and ensure the development of solutions from policy development through to operational delivery. The vision articulated clearly within the Every Child Corporate Plan 23 to 28 states, every child and young person with SEN is happy, learning and succeeding. Members, we should accept nothing less. I want all SEN children in North Antrim and across Northern Ireland to have the same opportunities as their peers, to have choices about what they do, and have an occupation which is both meaningful and enjoyable. I want all our young people to make positive contributions to their community and wider society. I want staff to feel that they are confident and capable to meet the additional support needs of children in the classroom. And for parents, I want them to be confident in their child's educational system. I want them to be communicated with at every stage of the process, and I want them to have the tools to support their children. Thanks, Deputy Speaker.
And thank you. All other speakers will now have 7 minutes, and I call Philip McGuigan.
Collier, and can I thank Colin for bringing the debate forward. It's a very appropriate opportunity to discuss the important issue, and can I begin also, Collier, by declaring an interest. My wife is a special educational needs assistant in a school within North Antrim. Every child, irrespective of background or ability, is entitled to an education, and every parent, every family of a child with special educational needs is entitled to support. Ensuring that children with special educational needs and disabilities get the highest levels of support is a priority for Sinn Féin. Currently, too many children with special educational needs and disabilities are being left behind, and currently too many families are having to battle with authorities, the department, the education authority, schools, transport providers for that appropriate support. These children and their families deserve better. For the system to work for everyone, then early intervention is key, as recognised by the Independent Review of Education. Unfortunately, instead of early intervention, too often we see long waiting lists and the lack of cross-departmental working together. We need to see health and education departments working side by side on this issue. Educational teams supported by health experts will give those children the best possible start in life, because delays in early intervention have a clear knock-on effect on the next stage of development. From nursery to primary school and from primary to secondary school, children should be attending the most appropriate school for their needs. Without an early diagnosis, many children are left in mainstream schools without access to support systems necessary for their social and academic advancement, or access to special schools or SEN units. And parents trying to circumvent the long waiting lists, who have chosen in their frustration to seek private assessments, are then mostly told that their private assessments, which they have paid large amounts of money to have completed, are not recognised by the Education Authority. Concollier, there have been a 50% rise in the number of children with a statement of SEN over the past 5 years and a 25% increase in pupils in special schools. The Department, and I know the Minister has moved on this, needs to develop quickly the special school sector and provide additional special school and special places and classes. And perhaps the Minister can clarify if in North Antrim there are any plans to expand special school provision. I know I did have conversations with the Department earlier in the year about a particular school in North Antrim that was closed down. I thought that it could have been used, but it didn't meet the Department's requirements, which I was disappointed about. As the previous speaker has mentioned, in Castle Tower, Ballymena in North Antrim, we do have a first-class school where fantastic modern services are available for those children who need it, and specialist staff provide the highest level of care and support to our most vulnerable children. However, this school and many like it are vastly oversubscribed. Castle Tower was designed with a business case stated for 285 students, and there are currently around 380 students enrolled at the school, with applications far outstripping the available places. Castle Tower is the only dedicated SEN school in the whole of North Antrim, and we have children in our area forced to travel long distances to access special educational needs provision in Coleraine, Limavady, Marfelt, and even in some cases to Belfast. These distances are difficult for any child, but for a child with special educational needs disabilities, travelling such journeys is particularly difficult. We need more specialist provision, similar to the fantastic service provided by Castle Tower, available to our vulnerable children in North Antrim. Specialist units for SEN children are available in mainstream schools like Our Lady of Lourdes in Ballymoney, Ballymoney High School, Dunclug College, St Patrick's Ballymena. But again, these schools can face issues with oversubscription and lack of resources. These schools provide excellent outcomes for some children who require SEN support, but for many children there is no substitute for special schools and the resources available within these specialist settings. The issue of travel for those with special educational needs is something I receive many contacts from constituents for every year. Those who are the most vulnerable are often those who face the most issues with school transport. For example, we have SEN pupils who use wheelchairs, and there are often issues where maybe a lift and the bus has broken down, constantly ensuring that they cannot be lifted onto the bus, and there may be shortages of chaperones which are essential for their travel. This obviously causes stress for parents and the children, as the children cannot attend school when these issues arise, and they arise much too often. Another issue are journey times for those with special educational needs, and in some cases these can be very long. I have constituents whose children live 15 to 20 minutes from school, but they face a 1.5 hour journey every morning and evening due to the bus travelling around to collect other children to transport them to school. For many children with SEN, these travel times are very difficult, and sometimes children must leave the house as early as 7 a.m. For a school start at 9 a.m. and endure the same journey home. This is happening to children as young as 3 or 4 at preschool age, and many children struggle to or cannot cope with these journey times. The AA must engage with parents to carry out suitable transport plans for these children to ensure that our most vulnerable children do not have to endure excessive journey times. In concluding, Concollier, and I welcome the Minister, and I know that the Minister has inherited this problem, and that as a result of Tory austerity, our education system as a whole, but special educational needs in particular, has suffered through lack of investment. But I do want to hear his plans and proposals with a particular focus on improving the situation for children and parents within North Antrim.
Paul Frey.
Speaker, and I rise first of all to thank the member from Northampton, Colin Crawford, for bringing this adjournment debate to the floor and to the attention of the Education Minister. It is an issue that we all grapple with in our constituency, but not only in North Antrim, right across Northern Ireland, as the numbers of children needing special educational support and needs grows. I suppose that's the first point I would make, Mr Deputy Speaker, in the fact that we will try and support these children as best we can. Society demands it of us, demands it of society also. But there are a number of factors that really worry me with regards to the level of children whose parents are trying to obtain statements, who require statements, who need statements, and then also the demand that needs to be met by the Education Authority, and they haven't been able to do that. And it's very clear that they are failing these young people and their families. And we all deal with it. We all deal with these families, and these families are pulling their hair out. Not only do they know the needs and requirements that their children, because they know them best, require, they also let them go out in the mornings fraught with worry, because they know that the provision and the support that the school should be able to require to look after their children isn't met. It's simply not met. And that's something that should give us all nightmares, because it certainly gives those parents nightmares. And then when they come to us and we try to deal with the Education Authority, I'm sure I'm not the only MLA who feel that we're being stonewalled by the Education Authority. And it's maybe tactical by the Education Authority, but do other members have the experience of writing, simply asking for information from the Education Authority, to be then placed in a formal complaints process? You didn't require that. I didn't require that. I don't want to be in a formal complaints process. The family don't want to be in a formal complaints process. They just want answers. They just want answers of when, why, when will the support be there, the general assistance be there, why have I only got 15 hours? Why not 24 hours? Why not full time? But instead of answering those questions, the Education Authority puts you into this formal complaints process, and you have to wait that period of time for the Education Authority then to come back and say, we have looked at our procedures, everything seems to be right, and your complaint is not withheld or upheld. But I didn't want, or we don't want to be in a complaints process. We just want communication and answers. And I do believe that is a tactic by the Education Authority in order not to engage with elected representatives and the people who we support. And I think that's blatantly wrong. It's really wrong that the Education Authority would take that avenue. And then, of course, you can go to the Public Service Ombudsman, but because the Education Authority have ticked all their boxes, went through their processes right, that's going to come back with no prospect of success either, because quite simply you're now complaining about a process, not trying to help the child. So it's a complete deflection by the Education Authority in the tactics of using that formal complaints process, and it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. I would like to know what policy the Education Authority uses in order to measure an individual child, so that they come to an outcome of 15 hours general assistance, 24 hours general assistance, no general assistance. I would like to know the policy that they use that's so robust that they can measure and estimate a single child, an individual's needs and requirements. And I'm yet to see that formal policy that they use in order to make these decisions. I will take this opportunity to thank the Minister for Education, because I do believe he is listening. I do believe that he has a grasp of the scale of this problem, and he has, since been in post, endeavoured to try and resolve these issues. This isn't an issue that has come on his watch, but he is prepared, I can see, to try and resolve the issue in his time. And I would thank the Minister personally for attending with me some of the visitations we have had with schools in North Antrim, namely William Pinkerton Memorial Primary School in Dervick and Ballymoney High School of late. And the Minister will know there's a couple more coming in through the pipeline for him to attend. But I also know that the Minister has attended other schools in North Antrim by other invitations by other MLAs, and also pressing needs by the principals. The Education Authority are not only letting the children down and the parents down, they're letting their principals down. The principals are pulling their hair out because they also want answers as to how the Education Authority can come up with results and assessments as to what child needs what general assistance, whether it be 15 hours or more. And they can't get the same answers. And in fact, pressure is applied on those principals when they do try to fight for their children. Some of these cases are really severe. Some of these children face severe challenges on a daily basis, sometimes even life-limiting or worried. And principals are extremely concerned, teachers are extremely concerned that they do not get the support from the Education Authority when it comes to looking after these children. And that alarms them, but it also alarms parents. And we need to get a grip of this for the sake of the children. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Cal Mulholland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and thank you so much to my constituency colleague, Colin, for bringing this debate before us. I think most of us will have had some of these families in our offices explaining some of the situations that they have been in. And for me, I mean, the special education needs provision within North Antrim also needs to be put through a rural lens. I know that previous speakers have spoken about some of the key issues, but actually when you look at the spread of North Antrim and you look at some of those villages, particularly in the Causeway Coast and Glens area, where children are having to travel an exceedingly a very large amount of time and distance to actually get to the likes of Castletower. And although there are brilliant SEND provision units within some of our schools, in and around the more rural areas, I think there is a real issue of spread. But yeah, so despite the countless reviews and recommendations, I do think the system continues to fail some children and families across Northern Ireland, but North Antrim, with its dedicated schools, educators and voluntary organisations, reflects both the struggles within the system and the possibilities of what we can achieve when we work together. For over a decade, report after report has painted a picture of a SEND system unable to meet the needs of our children. I think that is clear to see. The Minister and the Department has acknowledged the failure, and I think, as many have said, it is something that is inherited. This isn't something that's happened overnight. But I do think the Department remains overwhelmed when it comes to our SEND provision, consumed by those statutory processes rather than being able to focus fully on the needs of children. Families and schools have faced a labyrinth of delays and miscommunication, leaving children waiting far too long for diagnoses, for support, for intervention. And I don't think that's because of a crisis of resource. Sometimes it can be a crisis of priorities, and there is a little bit of bureaucracy taking precedence over outcomes, and those families would say it is simply unacceptable. One of the most significant barriers to the reform is the lack of effective cooperation between education and health services, as mentioned by my colleague Philip McGuigan. SEND provision often relies on health professionals like speech therapists and occupational therapists, yet those services remain disjointed. Although I have just received a text message from a parent whose child is 5 years old in Castletower and who has said the weight that is lifted off her shoulders by Castletower bringing in those therapists into the school system, so they don't actually need to go and look elsewhere. The weight that's lifted off her shoulders has been incredible, but we're not being able to see that for all families. So that result in that siloed kind of working system is a delay in diagnosis, delays in statements, delays in the provision of vital support, delays that could cause harm to the children that we should be helping. Something that I am particularly passionate about is the Children's Services Cooperation Act, which was passed in 2015. That was designed to address those silos, that kind of mentality across departments, but both the Public Accounts Committee and the obligatory statutory review of CSCA have made it abundantly clear that that legislation is not being utilised to its full potential. It's something that I have communicated to the Finance Minister about, and it's something I've communicated through many Assembly questions to the Education Minister about, because I do think that it is a useful tool if used to the fullest of its potential. It is a missed opportunity. It could and should be the foundation of a joined-up system that places children at its centre. Instead, it remains an untapped resource, gathering dust while children continue to fall through the cracks. And agencies must embrace the cooperative ethos of CSCA to align efforts across education, health and social care. What is desperately needed is an actionable transformation plan, and a plan that emerges from that end-to-end review of the SEND provision. This cannot be another review, gathering dust. It has to have and it must result in clear actions, measurable outcomes and time-bound goals, and only then will we actually begin to rebuild trust with families, with educators and most importantly with children who depend on the system. The system should also identify needs early. We know that early intervention is one of the absolute key positive outcomes, or adds to the most positive outcomes. But the challenges in North Antrim remain stark. You know, I've spoken to a SEND teaching assistant in Dunclog Primary School, and she shared some of the struggles faced by staff and asked me would I share it today. So children who wait years for a diagnosis delays their access to the crucial resources like one-to-one assistance. Schools who lack funding for essential resources such as their sensory equipment, and that can transform learning environments for the children that they work with. She said that staff are overworked, often responsible for multiple children with complex needs, despite being assigned to support one-to-one. It's just the nature of what they have to deal with, and sometimes training can be inadequate, leaving staff unprepared to handle the significant challenges that they face daily that they weren't necessarily expecting to or trained to deal with. And I think that she put it best when she said earlier intervention can help a child so much more than letting them struggle for the next few years. These issues are compounded by pay disparities. SEND teaching assistants in mainstream schools earn significantly less than their counterparts in special schools like the fabulous Castle Tower, despite doing the same work. The inequity undermines morale, and the retention in an already challenging role is what I've been hearing. I also want to cheer on the voluntary and community sector who are stepping up and stepping in when the statutory sector has failed. I have the privilege of engaging directly with the amazing efforts of the Compass Advice Network, CAN, in Ballymoney, and they exemplify what can be achieved through grassroots initiatives, enhancing lives and creating change for individuals with learning disabilities, autism and mental health challenges. So every delay, every missed opportunity, I suppose, represents a child whose potential goes unfilled. So hopefully we can see fully implementing CSCA, addressing the funding gaps in the interim, investing in staff training in the interim, and in the longer term, that transformation action plan, and being able to identify needs early at the point of identification, then looking at that early intervention. Thank you.
Timothy Gaston.
Much, Deputy Speaker, and I want to start off, like the rest of the speakers, by commending my colleague Colin Crawford for bringing this adjournment debate, and I want to also point out and commend him for his volunteering work over the years that he has taken part in with special needs kids prior to coming to this House, and I know this is a topic very close to his heart. It will come as no surprise to this House that I want to focus my comments on North Antrim, in particular Castle Tower School. This school opened in 2018 after a long-awaited £21 million investment on the 13-acre site that it sits on. The real issue facing this school is there are extremely limited options for expansion, and they have had to move and operate between Castle Tower and the old Bally High School, now home to the EA. Given limited class sizes for obvious reasons, They are now in a position of having to turn away children who are clearly in need of a place here, as they have simply run out of room. Demand for these specialist services simply outstrips supply. I want to commend my colleague in Mid and East Antrim Council, Councillor Matthew Armstrong, for his work on this issue regarding Castle Tower, who in the past has arranged a meeting between the school, the department and council to urge some outside of the box thinking around facilities. But his summary of how that initiative ended up, to say the department love wallowing in red tape would be an understatement. While predictable, it's depressing. If the department is to get serious about addressing the lack of special educational needs provision, then they need to abandon their piecemeal approach and start making wholesale changes, which will last longer. One thing I would like to say regarding Castle Tower, there is an option available to them. The old Ballymena Nursery building is dilapidated. With intervention from the department, there could be an option to relocate Ballymena Nursery to a new site and allow Castle Tower then to expand into the Ballymena Nursery site. I asked the Minister to engage with Castle Tower School directly to consider what help he can offer to meet the growing demand of this school, which supports much of North Antrim. Thank you.
Carol Hunter.
Speaker, and I'd just like to take this opportunity to welcome the member to the Education Committee. We've had him for the past few weeks, which has been great, and thank you so much for bringing this forward as well. It's such an important issue. Every child deserves the opportunity to thrive, yet for too many children with special educational needs and disabilities across Northern Ireland, from North Antrim and the wider North West, this remains out of reach. Changing this is a priority for the SDLP. With nearly 20% of our school population identified as having special educational needs and over 22,000 young people having a statement, the demand for tailored support is both undeniable and growing. And for so many, even getting a statement is unbelievably difficult. Principals, one which I recently spoke with just last Friday, had said oftentimes they're put in the awful position of choosing what child should be sent for assessment when many really need the support. And parents feel every bit of this. Parents are left running in circles trying to find school placements, support that helps their child achieve, and finding support both inside and outside of the classroom. Parents spend late nights worrying, early mornings trying their best to support their child and their needs, and attend multiple appointments to give their child the best start in life. From language therapy classes to sensory classes and more, parents are burnt out and exhausted trying to make it all happen. But before I continue today, I'd like to thank the Children's Law Centre and the NI Children's Commissioner for their hard work, their tireless work advocating for children across the North who have special educational needs. And I particularly like to thank Causeway Neurodiversity, which is a remarkable group of people who have come together from all different backgrounds. They cross quite a region from my constituency to North Antrim. There's parents, there's experts by experience, activists, health workers and more, and they gather together. And they have an online platform as well on Facebook to bring together people to talk about the experience of being a parent who struggles with a child who has special educational needs, and to put people with special educational needs at the forefront of the conversation to hear their lived experience. I'd like to thank them for their hard work, their dedication and the support they provide to so many families across my area and North Antrim. And of course, today, at the heart of this conversation is education. The number of children needing specialised support has increased by 24% over the last 5 years. But despite this, many families are left waiting for placements, battling an overstretched system that lacks sufficient resources. And today, over 1,000 additional SEND places are urgently required, along with specialist classrooms and adequate funding to ensure these children can access the education they deserve. And I'd like to thank the Minister and his colleague Alan Robinson for the work earlier this year on ensuring that Rossmar Special School got the capital funding necessary to facilitate more space on their site. And I also welcome, on the topic of Caleb's cause and post-19 support for children with special educational needs, it really is a cliff edge. They feel totally unsupported, and after the age of 19, going into the society for anybody can be incredibly unnerving and an uncertain time. But for them, I think it's really important that we do all we can to to support post-19. And I do note that Rossmar Special School is potentially looking at provision of support for children and young people from the age of 19 to 25. So that could be an answer. We're looking at things and how we can support young people. That could be a good way to go. But this is just not about what happens within the walls of the classroom. The failure to address SEND needs impacts children profoundly. Social anxiety, general anxiety, isolation, academic setbacks and mental health crisis are sadly becoming all too common. And these children that we're talking about here today are not just statistics. They are future scientists, artists, carers and leaders. And if we fail to support them and to protect them now, we fail to unlock their full potential. Investing in SEND provision means more than just funding. It means ensuring teachers have the training to meet the range of diverse needs, developing specialist facilities to support parents and young people, and integrating wraparound support for families. It means committing to a system that values every child equally. And with that, I would like to thank the incredible staff within these schools, for example, Sandalford in my constituency, and of course Rossmar Special School in Limavady. But today I think we're talking about the topic of the provision of support for children with special educational needs, and I think something that we do need to discuss as well is around the issue of respite care and you know, happy parents lead to happy children. And for so many parents with children who have SEND needs, they rarely ask for much, but when they do ask for respite care, they cannot get it. And you know, one example of this is I had a constituent, it was a very sad story, whose teenage daughter has a complex and special educational needs, recently survived cancer, and is absolutely doted on by her parents. And these parents wanted to get away for a few days after a period of pain, uncertainty, but were only turned down at last minute. And that was to do with the wider North Antrim area as well. So it just goes to show that's just one story of many, but respite care is a fundamental support mechanism, a safety net for parents to have that much needed downtime, because they're just fantastic at what they do in supporting their children to be the best that they can be. We urgently need to support parents who deserve rest in taking care of children who have special or complex needs. The need is urgent. Let us work together to build an inclusive education system that uplifts all children, both inside and outside of the classroom. Their future depends on it. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to all members who have spoken in the adjournment debate. I now call on the Minister of Education to respond. And Minister, you have up to 10 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the member, Mr Crawford, for bringing this debate to the floor of the Assembly, speaking to these very important issues, and join with the commendation made by Mr Gaston in paying tribute to your work in volunteering and your particular interest in this area. So thank you for that. Can I thank all members for your contributions to this debate, and I'll just lay out some of my responses to that. Obviously, from I was appointed, this has been one of the main areas that I have been focused on in terms of what I can do to improve the lives of all children and young people. And I have prioritised better support for special educational needs, and I know members have recognised that, to make sure that we're aligning with the executive priorities that are set out in the draft programme for government. Mr Frew highlighted some of the issues that we are trying to resolve, and he's right, I've visited a number of schools that he's invited to me and other schools that other MLAs have asked me to visit. But some of the most impactful visits that I've had has been to our special schools. Whilst I've witnessed the impact those specialist provisions in mainstream settings are having, those special schools are exactly what they say. They are special, they are unique, but they are very much challenging environments. And Cyan mentioned, the member for North Antrim, the issues around health support and therapies, and I have witnessed the benefit of speech and language therapists, physiotherapists, nurses being available in those special schools. That highlights the necessity of other departments and trusts working with the Department of Education and the Education Authority in order to meet the need. It's a concern that I have about the withdrawal of services. That's why I'll be meeting with the Minister for Health shortly and some principals of special schools as to why that change is happening, because I agree with the member when she said that being in the school setting and then receiving that additional medical support is critical, And why take a child out of school when you can treat their needs in school? But there are increasing medical complexities for young people in special schools, and that's where Mr. Frew spoke about the concern that many principals have, not having that expertise. That's something that we look to other departments and trusts to support us in. By September of this year, we have created over 1,450 new places. They've been established to meet the needs for specialist placements. Yet the picture for September 2025 and beyond, it remains very challenging. The statutory annual review for children and young people with statements of special educational needs process has recently commenced. This will inform the EA's planning assumptions for September next year. Strategic area planning in line with the projected need will be key to ensuring that there is sufficient special education provision for future years, and the Education Authority is currently working on an operational plan which prioritises special education. The Department recently carried out a survey across all mainstream schools seeking their views to understand their readiness to establish specialist provisions, and Mr McGuigan asked the questions around, particularly in North Antrim, in terms of the schools and what we're doing to support schools. So I can confirm, and 49 schools in the North Antrim constituency did respond to that recent survey. I'm pleased that 23 of them indicated a willingness to establish new or further provision for September 2025 and beyond. So the Department and the Education Authority will be working with schools both in North Antrim and other localities on the creation of specialist provision to meet future demand across all areas. So I appreciate the members' commitment to securing sufficient special education provision in North Antrim. It is an area that has been identified by EA of having pressure for additional places in both special schools and specialist provision in mainstream schools, and a number of members mentioned Castle Tower. I want to assure the member and all members that I recognise the challenges in North Antrim, and I want to commend Castle Tower and the wider special school sector for their daily work in supporting our children and young people with the most complex of special educational needs and medical needs. This is alongside the mainstream, where colleagues have embraced the opportunity to establish specialist provision to reflect the growing and changing needs within the local community. The Education Authority is working closely with sectoral partners and schools to build capacity into the entire system for the future, and I've been asked, and they have been asked, to submit proposals for any required extension of special schools, which will now be taken forward within the School Enhancement Programme. Members will remember the statement I made in the House around the new capital strategy for special educational needs, a 10-year strategy, and that initiated EA. I commissioned them to do the work for every single special school in Northern Ireland. What provision can we enhance? Does that require school enhancement programmes? So the work, as well as identifying where 8 new schools need to be located in Northern Ireland over the next 10 years, that's a piece of work that we commissioned, and EA will be providing an update to me on that shortly. The end-to-end review of special educational needs has now concluded, and I'll shortly set out my reform agenda for special educational needs and disabilities. And to assure members, that is a delivery plan. It's not another review. I'm clear on that. It's a delivery plan that we need, not more review. So this will include that clear plan for the delivery of transformation across the education system to ensure that all children with special educational needs and disabilities have access to high quality education through the delivery of the right support by the right people at the right time, and importantly in the right place. That will mean significantly reforming our approach to how we support children, young people and their families. At a recent event, a parent asked, "Who is preparing the community for my child?" And we must take a whole child, family, school and community approach to ensure that we improve outcomes for our most vulnerable children. So working closely with colleagues across the executive, local government and voluntary and community sector, we'll tackle these issues. Education cannot do this alone. However, provision is not just about how we support our children, it's also about where they go to school. So our schools need to be those vibrant hubs that they're welcoming and safe places for children to promote their well-being and learning. It's clear that the school estate has suffered through a lack of investment and planning, and my statement to the Assembly in April indicated the biggest change to capital planning in a generation. And I committed then to an ambitious, far-reaching long-term plan that will require sustained and increased capital investment of around £500 million over the next decade to rebuild and reconfigure the school estate across Northern Ireland to ensure every child and young person is happy and learning, succeeding in their educational journey. It is a priority that planning for special educational needs provision progresses to a stronger strategic footing, which will ensure the growing numbers of learners with special educational needs have timely access to appropriate education placements meeting their need. The strategic approach that I've set out will consolidate around my special educational needs and disabilities reform agenda and that delivery plan. This will set and train a process to deliver and secure a better future for all of our children with special educational needs and disabilities across Northern Ireland. Our schools, they are leading the way in supporting and making provision for our children, young people and their families, and I am immensely proud of the work that goes on in our schools, and I know every member has highlighted the excellence that they have borne witness to when they have visited schools. And as Minister, I am keen to support the reform that our families and schools have been calling for, and I know members will continue to advocate for their constituents, hold me to account, and rightly so, as I seek to deliver on the reform agenda and supporting our young people that I want to take forward. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Minister, for that response. The Assembly is adjourned.
Assembly Chamber. Sound. Assembly Chamber. Sound. Assembly Chamber. Sound. Assembly Chamber. Sound.